Meeting to order. Madam City Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Jean Goss.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Edward Garcia.
Present.
Councilmember Rachel Arizmendi.
Present.
Councilmember Callie Krebs.
Here.
And Councilmember Robert Parkhurst.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum to conduct city business.
Would you all rise, please, if you can, and face the flag? Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Just a brief word of, I guess it's called inspiration. I was thinking about what to speak about tonight, and it wasn't too hard. I had a kind of inspiring Saturday, a week ago Saturday on the 12th. Most of my council colleagues were there with me when we just had a wet down and push-in ceremony for our brand new fire engine, which is a Pierce Enforcer, and with many layers of gorgeous red fire engine paint and chrome on chrome on chrome on chrome, shining and glistening away in the sunshine that beautiful morning. And we actually had what was called a wet-in ceremony, so that wet down ceremony, so the actual truck was wet, and then people who were there got to participate in drying it off, which was apparently a great tradition, and we were all happy to participate in that. So it's just an amazing, I consider this truck, it's top of the line. This is the best equipment we can get for our firefighters. I consider this to be now kind of an icon of our civic pride. And when you see that thing going down the street, and you can look up and you can be proud that this is Sierra Madre's fire truck. And those are our Sierra Madre firefighters. Just absolutely beautiful. And I mean, if you haven't had a chance to see it up close, these pictures kind of do it justice, but not really. You gotta go down to the fire station, knock on the door, and ask them to show you around, and they will. And it's really something. The other thing I wanted to say was that, and I think many of you are aware of it, but maybe some of you aren't, is that we were able to get to this level of a piece of fire equipment because of a donation by one of our residents, anonymous donation of $100,000. And I mean, talk about inspiring, talk about civic pride, talk about faith in our public service, our public safety elements of our government, and in our government itself. In this day and age where cynicism seems to rule the day, I think this is very inspiring. So having said that, I'm going to go ahead and turn our attention to tonight's agenda. If I could get somebody to make a motion to approve that agenda or amend it, whichever.
No recommendation for changes. I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? And that carries. And then we move to the approval for reading of resolutions and ordinances. I'd like to get a motion for approval of that, please.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That carries unanimously as well. And now we have a stack of minutes going back to the February 22nd meeting, but also including the City Council and Planning Commission meeting minutes. I'd like to take those all at once and see if there are any motions for amendments to any of them. Madam City Clerk, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, before you and for City Council are the meeting minutes for the joint meeting. That's the March 1st meeting, and that's the only meetings that are
Okay.
available presently.
Okay, great. That's what I thought.
Yes, and Councilmember Parkhurst submitted some clarification
Great.
comments, and those were incorporated into the minutes.
Okay.
Nothing substantive, just for clarification purposes.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes as amended?
Since I amended them, I'll make the motion
Okay.
to approve them as amended.
Is there a second?
I'll second after reading those 11 pages of minutes. Thank you, Madam City
Yes.
Clerk.
Exactly.
They were really well done.
Yes.
Truly. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that carries. And that takes us to mayor and city council reports. Who'd like to go first?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Parkhurst.
So, couple of things. So I really regret missing the wed-in over the weekend. I did get a chance to go down. They happened to be parked outside a Starbucks one day, and I was able to go in and take a look at the engine. And the crew there has done an incredible job retrofitting it or speccing it out. I don't know exactly the right term, but it is really phenomenal. Also, you know, it is not only something we should be proud of, but what I happen to like is it's making other cities drool. You know, they've said that some of our neighboring cities have come by to see it and have said, wow, this is really nice and really, we should be really proud of it. So I'd like to, it gives a little bit of civic pride there. I was out on the trails over the weekend, and as I was going up Mount Wilson, I was able to look out, and I saw something new out at the spreading base, and you could actually see all the solar panels out there, and I know we're getting close to getting that completed, and it was really thrilling. On more city business, I went to a CPA board meeting, and there seems to be always one or two between meetings. And then we also had a Natural Resources Commission meeting, and there we had two presentations, one by the League of Women Voters on actions cities can take around climate change, and I'm proud to say that we were doing many of the actions that they were recommending, including being 100% renewable and installing the solar panels and many of the other things, so I thought that was really good. And then the second presentation was from, I want to make sure I get the name right, I think it was, Joshua Torres and Jeanette Soriano from Southern California Edison, that was talking about the net energy metering 3.0, and it was a real education, and I walked away with it with a much better understanding of the challenges with that, I don't know what to call it. It's not an ordinance and it's not a law, but whatever a CPUC ruling is, and why it needs to change. I'm not fully, I want to see what kind of comes out of the commission out of it, but I see that there, it's 26 years old and it does need to evolve, and it really needs to address disadvantaged communities. So, and that's all I have to report.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Creeps.
So I don't have any backwards-looking report, although I will have to say that the ceremony introducing our new engine was amazing, and I think two features of the engine that have not yet been mentioned is that there's air conditioning inside, which is amazing for our firefighters, and if you've noticed when the picture was up, the cab is actually a little bit raised, and they actually fit inside with all of their uniforms now. So, two great things to improve the well-being and safety of our public servants. But prospectively, I just wanted to make the announcement that hopefully you've seen it all over social media and in the newspaper, and hopefully folks are talking about it on the street. But this Sunday is our Wisteria Festival for the first time in 2 years. So I hope everyone is planning on coming down to do that. There will be a historic home tour in lieu of a tour of the Vine, and so hopefully that will be new and exciting feature for this year. But I think everyone should come down and enjoy all of the activity that will be going on downtown. Also wanted to announce that our first public hearing with respect to the Monastery project will be at the Planning Commission meeting on Thursday, April 7th. The Planning Commission has been very busy, as we'll see tonight, clearing their agenda for that meeting on the 7th. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I can go ahead and jump in, Mr. Mayor. Just two things I wanted to report on. I'm the representative for the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, and it's a council that is comprised of about 30 different cities in the San Gabriel Valley. And there's two things that came up that I wanted to share. One is they put together a blue ribbon task force of sorts for to evaluate the homelessness approach or strategy in the county. And if you can recall, back when Measure H was passed, those dollars are supposed to go for homelessness, and the city of LA is taking the lead on that. And so there has been concerns, not just from our Council of Governments, but others like in the South Bay area, as to how that money is being utilized and the effectiveness of it. So the group is going to continue working on it. There's a general sense that the city of LA is getting most of the resources, and it's not really getting spread throughout the county. So they're trying to find ways to address that, and I'll share as to how that evolves over the next few months. The next thing I wanted to report on is that the water conservation measures that were put in effect by the governor, a lot of the different cities were like, I'm not sure how to put it into effect, how do we implement it, or is there any guidance? And I'm really proud to say that the work we did a few months ago on our water conservation efforts actually align with that, with what the state is asking for all the cities to do. So we're well above the curve, or in front of the curve, in implementing that. There's one area of issue of homeowners association that we can find a way to address, but as other cities are looking around as for guidance and figuring out what should we do next, I wanted to report that because of our staff was forward thinking that the city of Sierra Madre is already in compliance with those recommendations.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Mr. Mayor, yes, I want to echo all the feelings that occurred on the wet down and push in. It was a great event to see that apparatus live. It was just glistening and beautiful. I appreciated Chief Bartlett and his comments regarding the tradition of the wet down, and it was great to see the engine that's going out of service actually wetting down the engine that's coming into service as a bit of tradition, and then seeing the firefighters and former volunteer firefighters pushing that engine back in. It's just and seeing the amount of people there was just a testament to our community engagement. I can't even imagine a city 5 times larger than us having that many residents there for basically blessing a new engine. So I'm really proud and happy that our public safety continues to thrive. We're going to have a presentation today, which is exciting, from the police department as well. And finally, kind of forward as well, April 2nd will be the Sierra Madre Community Foundation's Wine and Whiskey event. It's my understanding tickets have now been sold out, but they do have a waiting list. The Sierra Madre Community Foundation is a great organization that partners with the city as well as other civic organizations and charities in order to help Sierra Madre thrive, and really helps it to enhance the quality of life we have here in Sierra Madre. So if any of you can attend, that would be great. Get your name on the waiting list, and if not, write a check to the Sierra Madre Community Foundation. They do benefit a lot of us here in town.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just briefly, I'd like to piggyback on what Councilmember Creep said about Sunday's Wisteria Festival. We have reason to believe it could be the best attended Wisteria Festival of all time, and it'll be more exhibits than we've ever had before. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I intend to be there myself, and I strongly encourage anybody watching to come down and join us Sunday. For this is what Sierra Madre is all about, is our Wisteria, right? So we want to turn out for it. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. I want to move on now to public comment on non-agenda items. You are limited to 3 minutes when you get up to speak, and we would like you to submit a yellow card to our city clerk before you do so. Public comment is now open.
I'll go if no one else is going to. There's a ballot initiative to downzone the monastery to the hillside residential zone. Maybe you've heard of it. If the city council were to downzone a property, especially a religious institution, in such a restrictive way, you'd get legal advice from the city attorney about what the consequences might be, what the risks are to the city. So I would just like to ask that since the voters will be the ones making this decision if the initiative gets enough signatures, that the city provide a public forum to educate the voters as to what the risks are of downzoning a religious institution, particularly in respect to our LUPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which is a federal law that regulates overly restrictive downzoning of religious organizations. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurdy. Other public comments on non-agenda items? I think this could be a record. Okay, we'll move right along with our agenda tonight. We have a presentation and badge, introduction and badge pinning of a police officer, Hiroshi Yokoyama. I think Chief Armlin will be down.
Darn fire department's always getting me in trouble. Had to get my partner a chair, sir. I apologize. All right, well, good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to our newest officer, and that's going to be Officer Hiroshi Yokoyama. Hirsch, would you come up? So I absolutely do mean it is my pleasure. Hirsch and I worked for the Sheriff's Department together for 32 years. He was actually a 33-year veteran, and he retired probably a few days in front of me. And he decided to enjoy retirement for a while, and he's been off. So he recently reached out to me and said, you know what, I still got that fire in me. I still want to come out and serve the community. And I said, well, I got the right place for you, and it's right here in the city of Sierra Madre. Hirsch, highly experienced officer. I want to tell you we're extremely lucky to get him. He's worked 8 sheriff stations, including Santa Clarita, which is a really big station with over 300 sworn officers. He actually also worked Marina Del Rey Station, where, believe it or not, he was the harbor master.
Wow.
No boats out here, my friend.
No.
But bears.
No boats out here, my friend. He worked Sheriff's Crime Lab. He worked North Patrol Division, where he was part of the overall management team for 5 sheriff stations, and that's well over 1,000 police officers policing many cities. He also worked Sheriff's Personnel Bureau, where basically they're the HR department for the entire Sheriff's Department. And he also worked Crime Lab, and they are absolutely the experts at conducting crime scene investigations. So we are extremely lucky to have him. I'm excited to get my friend back alongside me, and it's a really good thing for our city. Hirsch, you have anything you want to add before we bring your family up?
Sure. Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, City Manager, City Attorney, City Clerk, Chief Armlin, and my new colleagues at the Police Department, as well as the residents of Sierra Madre. On behalf of a grateful family, we want to thank you all for the opportunity to serve the community. As if 32 years is not enough in law enforcement, after a couple years of being able to think about a lot of things, reflect upon my career during the COVID lockdowns, and then also looking at other careers. I soon found out that in law enforcement, when you're in such a long time in it, ends up being your specialty. And so I still have the fire, just like the chief said, and I'm willing to go back to work. Still in good shape, and so I feel like I could be very productive and helpful for our team here at the police department. And so, in summary, I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity.
Welcome aboard, officer.
Thank you very much.
I just have to say it, Hirsch is our Tom Brady. He's coming back. So at this time, I'd like to invite his lovely wife, Ani, and his daughter, Emily, up to come up and officially pin his badge on him.
Oh, I gotta look. Oh my, it's a mirror.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Welcome.
And that takes us to our consent agenda. Madam City Clerk, would you like to review it for us, please?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
is Director Prince not making his
No,
presentation?
he's not going to be here tonight. It's on the agenda. If you have an agenda, Director Miles Prince was unable to make it tonight. We're rescheduling with him for his presentation.
Mr. Mayor, before you and the City Council this evening are 5 consent items, 7 consent items for your consideration. Consent item A is the consideration of Resolution 22-14 approving certain demands. And it is recommended that the City Council approve Resolution 22-14, and that's approving the payment of city warrants in the aggregate amount of $329,661.76. Additionally, Sierra Madre Library warrants in the aggregate amount of $2,218.71. And finally, payroll transfer in the aggregate amount of $444,119.57 for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. Consent item B is consideration of award of construction contract to All-American Asphalt, Inc. And this is for the construction of the fiscal year 21-22 street improvement project, labeled number ST82202, in an amount not to exceed $682,000. And it is recommended that the City Council award a construction contract to All-American Asphalt Contracting, Inc. Consent item C is the annual housing element progress report, and it is recommended that the City Council receive and file this progress report. Consent item D is the Treasurer's report for the quarter ending December 31, 2021, and it is recommended that the City Council receive and file the Treasurer's report. This is for the cash and investment portfolio for the quarter ending December 31, 2021. Consent item E is consideration of approval of increases for the open purchase orders where the purchase order plus the increase exceeds $45,000 for fiscal year. It is recommended that City Council authorize these previously budgeted increases for purchase orders to allow staff to complete necessary purchases of services, supplies, and contracts based upon the needs of each department. Consent item F is a consideration of new commission and board regular meeting times, an amendment to also the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Commission to be named simply this Natural Resources Commission. It is recommended that the City Council approve changes to the regular meeting times as suggested by the Community Services Commission, the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Commission, and the Library Board of Trustees. It is further recommended that the City Council approve the request by the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Commission to change their commission name to Natural Resources Commission only. And lastly, consent item G is consideration of the 2022 water main lining project change order, and it is recommended that the City Council approve a change order to the 2022 water main lining project in the amount of $7,200. Mr. Mayor, this concludes the report.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Got a lot of items on the consent agenda, and I think I'll just take them one at a time to see if there are questions. So let's just start item A.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Parkhurst.
So I just wanted a question. So it looks like some of the costs and the warrants were related to catalytic converters. Do we know how many vehicles those came from and kind of what we're doing about those?
I see Director Semino heading to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you for that question. Yes, the city yard was hit twice by catalytic converter thieves. I think it was a total of 11 vehicles the second time and 5 vehicles the first time. Some of the vehicles consisted of 2 catalytic converters on them, and 2 of the vehicles were hit on each event. So I think it's a total of 17 vehicles, maybe 20 catalytic converters.
And what are we doing about to try to help make sure that this doesn't happen again? It's kind of an
Yeah, it is an extraordinary event in Sierra Madre. After the second event, we did take extra measures, and we
hired a security firm to patrol the city yard after hours, well into the morning hours. Last week we had security cameras installed. We're in the process of having those cameras uploaded to be monitored on a daily basis. It's to dumb it down a little bit, it's like a ring system. So when there is movement after hours, we can set the parameters of time. When there's movement in those cameras, the police dispatch will get notified. The police chief will get notified, myself. Arnolfo at the city yard will get notified also of any activity at the yard after hours. So that should be up and running this week. I can't tell you which day, but soon.
Director Semino, I know a few weeks ago we offered at no cost engraving for catalytic converters. Did we engrave our own city vehicles?
We did, and some of our vehicles we have put extra precautions on there. We've welded some other kind of pipes or metal between the catalytic converters, so they not only cut the tailpipe, they'll have to cut other pieces of metal there to remove them. We engraved some of them, not too many. You know, we didn't get time to get in there, and it is ironic that that event was in the middle of our two events at the yard. So, but we did quite a few. I know we had a lot of participation on that event also, so they were busy there.
Thank you, Director. Any other questions on item A? Item B?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Creeves.
So just to clarify, action on this would be to award the construction contract for the street improvement, but would also recommend rebidding for the library project. This is not, there were a couple of options on that, so I just wasn't sure.
Thank you for that question. This year's project, we tried to include what we budgeted for library parking enhancement and ADA improvements there. The way our contracts are written, or the bid package is written, the contractor had a base bid, and we award based on the base bid, not the alternatives that are added to it. If we added the alternatives to it, to the lower bidder on the base bid, it threw the project way out of range for our price. So we thought it would be best to award the base bid with alternate 1, which is a small alternate, and then rebid the library project on its sole. That would be our recommendation, to rebid the library parking by itself.
And are we concerned that the library parking project will be over the budget amount that we thought it would, or is there just something quirky about this budget bidding process?
It was just quirky about the bidding process. No, we don't think it's going to be over our budget. It's going to be well within our budget.
Thank you, Director. Any other questions on item B? Item C? Item D? E? F?
Mr. Mayor? Oh,
Go ahead. Councilmember Creeves.
just a quick question. I know that this is, when I was in liaison to the Planning Commission, and I know I was at the meeting where the Planning Commission discussed this. So I just wondered, the 3 commissions that we are considering time changes for, is it the case that those commissions each approved the time change in their own commission meeting?
Councilmember Creeves, the 3 commissions, well, the 2 commissions and the board all had this agendized on their various agenda meetings. So it was part of their meeting agenda. In terms for the library board, they have the authority to change their own time, so they voted early on to make that change, but to remain consistent with all the authorities, we included that as part of the report. But they do have the authority as the library board because they work with the state, they are governed by the state, they have the authority to change the meeting times on their own.
Other questions? Yes, Councilmember Parkhurst.
A question on the renaming of the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Commission. Does that change their scope at all for what the commission will be covering and what they'll be working on?
Councilmember Parkhurst, their scope will remain the same. The commission felt that natural resources would still cover all the duties that it presently has, including the environment and energy and various other trees. And so they felt that natural would be also, just being natural, simply Natural Resources Commission would cover everything they're already doing.
Other questions? And item G, any questions? Hearing none, I will turn this over to public comment on any of the items A through G on the consent agenda.
Deb Sheridan, Valley Vista Drive. Good evening, council members. And this is on item F. I attended the Community Services Commission meeting last night. The request for a time change has come from staff and not from the commissioners themselves. It was fine when COVID was raging, but now people are back to work with somewhat normal schedules, and changing from 6:30 to 5 o'clock will be a hardship, not only for those who wish to attend and or speak, but also you will be asking for a new commissioner this summer as one will be termed out. When I was chair of the Community Services Commission, 2 members would come in their baseball uniforms, and they were managing their little league teams. 5 p.m. would have been too early for them. I remind you that you council members use the excuse to reduce the Planning Commission from 7 members to 5, saying that it is difficult to get volunteers, yet this will make it even more difficult to get anyone to volunteer. What about the transparency you're always telling us that there is at City Hall? There is another step in becoming more difficult for the residents. When I spoke to the Community Services Commission last night, one commissioner asked if they could reevaluate, and he was told by a staff member that it was too late because they were going to go before you tonight. Staff attempted to change the meeting time of the Planning Commission as well, but planning commissioners refused to be bullied, and their meeting remains a more reasonable 7 o'clock. And I might remind you too that Civic Club is 78 years old, and they don't meet until 7:30. And many of the Civic Club members are my age, so people can stay till start at 7:30, but it is impossible for people to get here at 5 o'clock if they work. And I just would like to ask you to leave the community services meeting time at 6:30 or take it back to them for reconsideration of another vote. Thank you.
Other public comment on the items in the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none, I'll bring this back to council. What's your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor, if I can comment, I'm the liaison for the Community Services Commission, and although I was unable to attend yesterday's meeting, it's my understanding that the commissioners were polled, and that was the time that they chose, so I wanted that on the record. I believe if the commissioners decide to change it again, they can agendize that, but that is my understanding as to how the time was chosen.
And I can say as the liaison for Library Board of Trustees, even though they are independent, they've also come to that same conclusion on their own.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I received a similar comment in an email from resident Deb Sheridan, and I immediately called a commissioner to ask what their feelings were because I was shocked. This former chair told me that he remembers being polled and his preference would be at 5 o'clock. Being a father that does, he doesn't coach Little League anymore, he's now coaching Pony, and he says it works better for him because his whole evening is now not shot. He can come in at 5 o'clock, and the meeting will be done generally within an hour, 6 o'clock, so he still has the evening available. So it was his preference to keep it at 5 o'clock.
Mr. Mayor.
That's Councilmember Parker's.
So, well, it would be my preference for example, with the Owner Commission to keep it as energy, environment, and natural resources. I believe that it's, a community commission and they should have oversight on it. And so if these things have been agendized at the various meetings, I think it's up to them. I mean, we're asking them to spend their time to do these things, and I think we, should honor and recognize that. If it's gone to them, it's been agendized and voted, I'm comfortable with this item.
Mr. Mayor, I recall when we had on our agenda the time of this meeting, our meetings, and I remember getting actually a huge variety of comment from the public as to whether early or late was better for transparency and availability. And so I think this is frankly more personal choice and personal lifestyle of folks who are attending meetings and participating. And I know the Planning Commission did decide to keep their meeting later because that was more effective for them. But I remember that there were community members who suggested that would be too late for them to participate. So I think there's really no perfect time. And I agree with Councilmember Parkhurst that I like to give the autonomy to the commissions, and if they've voted on it, I think that's something we should respect.
Any other comments on any item? Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So now we move on to public hearing, right? And consideration of adoption of ordinance 1449 and 1450. And I believe we have staff from the planning department here.
Good evening, mayors and members of the City Council. This public hearing item before you will require a City Council action. And for City Council to consider and to introduce the first reading of the Ordinance 1449, amending Chapter 17.29, and the Ordinance 1450, adding Chapter 17.39. When City Council adopted the sixth cycle housing element in November 2029 to provide opportunities for housing development, the City Council directed staff and Planning Commission to develop zoning ordinances for the identified opportunity sites. And these sites are required to be rezoned by state law within 1 year from the start of the sixth cycle housing element, which is by October 15, 2022. The Planning Commission held multiple meetings to discuss the zoning ordinances and passed by resolution on March 3rd, recommending the City Council to adopt the ordinance amending Chapter 1729 for multiple family residential for R320 and R330, adding Chapter 17.39 religious housing overlay zone, and amend the existing zoning map to be consistent with the housing element. The purpose of the ordinance is to provide zoning development standards to accommodate cities' regional housing need for all income levels. So first of all, Ordinance 1449 is to amend the title of the Chapter 17.29 away from the RH abbreviation to R320 and R330 high-density residential zone. This would address the confusion that often occurred when involving abbreviation for the residential hillside management zone. And the ordinance sets a minimum lot size of 11,000 square feet, provided density range required by the state law at a minimum of 20 units per acre to 24 units per acre for the parcels zone R320, and the density at 30 to 34 dwelling unit per acre for the R330. It sets the minimum front yard setback of 15 feet, maximum height at 30 feet or 3 stories, being the third story element shall be 40 feet away from any street. The maximum floor area ratio is set by the state law that to prohibit local agencies from imposing a floor area ratio standard that is less than 1 on a housing development project and require a 250 square feet of ground level open space unit. The ordinance also provides incentives for lot consolidation to allow up to 35 feet in height when the street frontage is greater than 100 feet. The ordinance also includes a preliminary design review language that matches the city's SB 9 AB 803 ordinance that you will be reviewing in the later agenda. Ordinance 1450, Religious Housing Overlay Zone, is adding a chapter that goes hand in hand with the state law that allow repurposing of a church parking for affordable housing and expand the opportunities to connect housing projects with community institutions. The ordinance sets a density range at a minimum of 20 dwelling units per acre and a maximum of 42 units per acre. It will require a minimum 50% of the unit to be affordable to lower income households. For ownership housing, it will require 90% of the unit to be affordable to a moderate income housing household. It sets a maximum height at 35 feet, 3 stories. Third story element shall be 40 away from any street, which means the first 40 feet from the street shall be 2 stories, maximum height at 30 feet, except on Michelinda Avenue. And the affordable housing development are exempt from lot coverage and floor area ratio standards. It will have a reduced open space requirement of 175 square feet per unit. And it also includes the preliminary design review language that mirrored the city's SB 9 AB 103 ordinances. Lastly, staff is recommending that the City Council amend the existing zoning map to be consistent with the adopted housing element. The full map is included in your packet as Exhibit E. And that concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Senior Planner Lynn. Questions for? Councilmember Parker.
Senior Planner Lynn, 2 questions. One, why is Michelinda has the max height, or what is the max height on Michelinda and why is it different?
So the maximum heights are all the same. It's 30 for religious housing overlay. It's all 35 feet in height. The only thing that is different about Michelinda Avenue is because it is a major arterial corridor that can support the units that is closer to the street front.
And the second question, and I apologize if this is at all a curveball, do we consider the building coverage ratio at all in any of our planning documents in addition to the floor area ratio?
So affordable housing developments are exempt from lot coverage and FAR.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, hearing none, thank you, Senior Planner Lynn. I'd like to see if there's public comment on this issue. We're opening the public hearing, soliciting public comment on this agenda item. Hearing none, I think it's back to us, folks.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
did we receive an email on this item?
it's a good question, Madam City Clerk.
Or was it another item? It was another item.
I received an email, but it's marked, item 2, so it would
That's
be
what it
the
is.
next one.
Right,
Mr. Mayor, a procedural question?
please.
So I noticed that most of these items are for first reading, but this one also has an approval tonight. Is there a reason why that's treated differently than the other first readings that I think are just actually a first reading, and then we'll do a second reading, I assume?
I believe the approval in this case, and Senior Planner Lynn can correct me if I'm wrong, is for the map. The map, is the map change being adopted via ordinance, or are they adopting that via resolution or minute order? Senior Planner Lynn, I don't know how that's proposed.
So the zoning map updates will be adopted by ordinance. It's part of the ordinance.
So in that case, there is no adoption happening tonight. There's just gonna be a first reading of the ordinance. So the vote would be for a first reading and introduction.
Okay. Yes,
I just want to say that having attended the Planning Commission meeting where this, at least one of the meetings where this was discussed, I have to say that our planning commissioners dive into this on such a depth that I have to say that for the most part, I really trust their recommendations. I mean, they are really debating, everything from the third story setback farther than the second story setback. I mean, just really looking out for maintaining as much as we can within the state regime, some measure of continuity and maintaining the character of our town. So I have to say, particularly on this, that really a well done job by our commission.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Parkhurst.
Yeah, I'll echo what Councilmember Krebs said. And I also note that, when they're doing this, they're doing a lot of cleanup. So if you go and you look at the red line of this and you initially go, oh my God, they're changing a lot. And then you read more closely and you're like, oh, they're making it a lot easier to read, like a normal person can read it. So I also really appreciate the effort that they put into that. And maybe it's staff as well. I don't know who writes it fully, but at least I know that they have a very detailed hand in it, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of the members actually wrote a good portion of the updates.
And Mr. Mayor, just a general comment, I know we've been doing a lot of cleanup, and I appreciate that staff has been addressing and pointing out which areas we need to do it in, and I think we're gonna continue seeing some of these, but, as the state laws change, as requirements change, it's necessary to do it, but it also takes, the eye of our staff, again, to do this, whether it's, making sure that we're consistent with our housing element, the confusion even with the RHs and it's very confusing. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I know that the Planning Commission really does understand what they are doing when they're having these discussions, and just like Councilmember Krebs said, is the recommendations move forth are not done without a lot of thought and a lot of research and a lot of the backup to make sure what we're doing is correct.
No, I mean, I'm in agreement. Wonderful idea, having a greater setback for the third story in both 1449 and 1450. It does comport with what I believe the citizens want, and it's a fantastic idea, given that HCD says we need to make sure that we fit more density in, and that's a great solution.
Okay. I have nothing else to add to what I've heard here. Totally agree with everyone.
I will move for the first reading to approve the first reading of ordinance 1449 as presented.
Can we add
And
1450?
1450 as well?
Yes, I suppose we can. 1449 and 1450.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Let's move on to public hearing item number 2, consideration of adoption of ordinance 1448,
All right, good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. Tonight, the council will be reviewing amendments to general plan land use and zoning maps. This item will require council action. So this is an application for a general plan amendment and a zone change. The general plan amendment is initiated as a follow-up to City Council's approval of a general plan amendment 2101 and zone change 2101. This was from last September, where consistency was addressed, addressing all of the inconsistencies between then the general plan land use map and the zoning map. As a result of that, there were several, or more than several properties that were downzoned. And the zone change for this application is just also required with changes to our general plan land use map. Planning Commission did recommend approval of the ordinance on March 3rd, 2022. This doesn't come as a traditional resolution as we've done with our past. This is being done under Senate Bill 10, which was, missed that. But anyways, Senate Bill 10, which was signed into effect by the governor last September, actually only 2 days after City Council passed their resolution to make consistent changes with our zone and general plan land use. And effectively what it does is it creates an easier process for cities to upzone parcels for up to 10 units of residential residences for each parcel. So here's some background information. What happened with the consistency update was that it resulted in a total of 168 parcels exhibiting changes either from R3 to R2, R3 to R1, or R2 to R1. And as a result, the council said and directed staff to expeditiously initiate a effort to re-upzone these. And so conveniently, with SB 10 being passed and being effective in on January 1st, 2022, we are able to make these changes in quite the haste City Council would like. So part of what SB 10 requires, there's 3 primary criteria. First, we have to find that the parcels are within the urbanized area. Second, that the parcels are either an urbanized infill site or located within a transit-rich area. And third, that the current land use and zoning of the parcels allows for residential uses. So I'm going to go over this really quickly. The second one has a subset of criteria, but the first one is a pretty easy criteria to meet. The 2010 Census Urbanized Area Map shows the urban clusters, and it shows that Sierra Madre here at the center is within that at the northern reach of the urbanized cluster. I do have a larger map if you'd like to see that later on. And this location within an urbanized cluster is also part of the subset criteria for the second primary criteria. Speaking of those subset criteria, we have to find that these parcels, again, that there are legal parcels located within the city that are part of the urban cluster. Second subset criteria is that at least 75% of its perimeter adjoins a parcel developed with an urban use. So what is an urban use? It's any current or former residential, commercial, public institutional, transportation facility or retail use, or any combination of those uses, with the general intent to preserve agricultural and natural open space land. So staff did conduct a study, site study and analysis with each of the 168 parcels being considered an urban infill site, where at least 75% of their perimeters were adjoining urban uses. The third subset criteria of this is that the parcel is zoned for residential use or residential mixed-use development. So all of the parcels in this study, all 168, are currently zoned for and have land use designations allowing for residential uses. This fulfills primary criteria 3 and subset criteria 2C. Also required pursuant to SB 10, codified by Government Code Section 65913.5, is that the City Council, in this case, the City Council would find that the increased density authorized by the ordinance is consistent with the city's obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. And essentially, the city already has this through increased opportunities to develop housing under Chapter 1734, the Affordable Housing Ordinance, and to increase opportunity to develop more transitional housing under Ordinance 1441, which adds transitional and supportive housing as permitted uses in our single-family, two-family, and multifamily zones. There's further findings that City Council approve a general plan amendment and zone change wherein the public interest, convenience, and necessity so require, and that this effort does address the concerns of the community that were arisen as a result of the consistency updates that resulted with downzoning of these 168 parcels. It does offer the interest of the public to give an opportunity to develop more housing, which would also fulfill the RENA obligation of our city in the general context of the region. Tonight, City Council may introduce for first reading by title only Ordinance Number 1448. This amends the general plan land use map and zoning map. They may also provide alternate direction, but staff is recommending to introduce for first reading by title only Ordinance 1448. That concludes my presentation. I'm open for questions, both of council and of the public. I do also have maps if we'd like to go over that.
Thank you, Associate Planner Wolf. Very fine report. What questions do we have for him? Mayor Pro Tem?
Planner Wolf, in your findings slide, you mentioned at the end of the slide that it helps fulfill the RENA obligation. And is that in regards to the 6th cycle or the 2029 or beyond 2029 7th cycle?
This is independent of the housing element. It's really just additional. It's not part of our housing obligation requirements.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Parker?
Planner Wolf, so if I understand, I think it's 2B, that you have to be at least 75% urban use. So we do have some parcels that wouldn't meet that, is that correct? If you're up, say, up on Sierra Meadows or up off of Carter, some of those parcels might not meet the 2B, is that correct?
Correct. If we were analyzing parcels that were right up against our foothills, yes.
And so you clearly did analyze that there's none of those that are there that are against the Angeles National Forest.
That is correct.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Krebs?
So the 168 parcels that are affected by this ordinance, I mean, that is intended to address the breadth and scope of the parcels that were changed by virtue of the consistency, making the maps consistent as we did in September. Those were those sites. That's how those were identified.
Right. They were identified through what was downzoned in the prior resolution, and what's happening is they're being restored to their prior zone.
Right. That's what I was going to ask. Other question?
Well, just to follow up on that.
Please.
So I did notice in the original staff report that some of them are not necessarily being restored to exactly their prior zoning. Did you want to just comment on how the decision was made that sometimes they were going to be zoned, the amended zoning would be slightly different or land use would be slightly different?
Can I ask for specifically which properties?
Well, for example, there were some that were, for example, on the land use, they were prior, their prior distinction or designation was RL, and the amended would be RH, and so it wasn't necessarily matching the prior, but maybe it's just different nomenclature.
All right. Are you referring to the exhibits?
Yes, Exhibit 1. If you just look at the first line, for example, on the Exhibit 1.
So in that one, I understand the confusion, but the prior zoning is actually the current zone after the effect of our last year's resolution to address the consistency. So the current zone would be that lower zone. The zone before the resolution last year would be what is proposed to be zoned as, or land use designation of. So I didn't include that in the exhibit because I thought it would be duplicative to add a column that is exactly the same as the proposed zone, but I can add that if you would like.
I'm sorry, can you explain that one more time? So prior does not mean prior to the consistency updates?
Prior, yeah, that is, I do understand your confusion. So prior does not mean prior to the consistency update, it means prior to this ordinance.
Okay.
Other questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
Because of SB 10, we're gonna be able to consecutively or at the same time update both zoning and land use maps, and those will be consistent if we take action on this and approve it.
Right, and that's how I would recommend addressing the ordinance, is both a general plan land use map and a zone change. Where in previous years we have only done general plan amendments. This is why we came back with consistency updates, which caused confusion. We don't want that to happen again.
Exactly. Yes, City Attorney Garagosian.
May I give some credit here to Planner Wolf, because SB 10 is a new bill. A lot of people don't know how to use it, and Planner Wolf was creative enough to figure out a way to use this and to get around the EIR requirement. Because if the city was required to do the EIR, it would have spent a lot more money on it, and it would have taken much longer to get this done. So the residents that asked for this to be processed as quickly as possible have Planner Wolf to thank for that.
Good to know.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, Associate Planner Wolf, thank you for your report. Thank you for your work on this. And I'll open this public hearing up for public comment at this time.
Mayor Goss, there was one email that was received from Eric Lynn. That email was forwarded to the City Council for consideration and uploaded to the city's website for transparency and public access. I do have 3 speaker cards. The first received from Joyce Kenyon.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Okay, I am here to talk to you about restoring my R3 zoning. I live on Mountain Trail, 220 Mountain Trail, and I bought the property with my husband. Well, my late husband and I bought the property, I think it was 1975, and it was zoned R3. And the reason we bought the property, it was a lot of work getting it in shape in the house. It was originally a log, little cabin, but we knew that being R3, that eventually if we needed it, if we sold it, that it would be good, because we would be able to make enough on the property when we retired, if we needed to go into a nursing home, et cetera, et cetera. I just didn't think that it would ever get to the point where I had to defend it or say, you know, it's R3 zone is what we bought it at. And like I say, the reason we did buy it is because it was R3. Now, I know everything about I don't know everything about the density, but when we're talking about the density on Mountain Trail where I am, across the street from me is an apartment house. To the north side, right next door to me, are units. 2 houses down are units. And when you go a little further south on Mountain Trail, there's, I think, 4 apartment houses. When you go left on Laurel, there's a big apartment house. I mean, there is a lot of density, and I'm just asking you to restore the R3 zoning. A lot of us, it's a very big concern for different reasons. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kenyon.
Mr. Mayor, the next speaker is Kathy Watson.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. This has been a long time coming, so we really want to thank you for expediting it. These changes took place because of the 2015 general plan, and you know, we were opposed to being downzoned, so we're especially thankful that you are considering it tonight. And I do thank Planner Wolf. The layman can understand his diagrams and charts, so I appreciate all the hard work that he's put into this too. This is the right thing to do to restore our zoning, and we want to highly encourage you to approve it tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, the third speaker is Jim Watson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I just want to thank you. The citizens came forward and brought a situation to your forefront, and you listened, and you're in the process of acting, and I'm very appreciative for what you're doing here. And so obviously I'm in favor of this 1448. Thank you.
Mr. Watkins.
And thank you, Mr. Wolf, because he really has spearheaded this, and he has put it in terms where we can really understand it. And thank you very much.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay, so we'll bring this one back to council.
Mr. Mayor, may I comment?
Please, Councilmember Arizmendi.
It's not every day we can do things this fast, especially on an issue like this. And you know, some things were oversight, some things were a matter of consistency, how the general plan was put together at a time, how we looked at our zoning maps, and there's a lot we can say as to what the intent was, and it wasn't to hurt owners that were hoping to have multifamily residents. And it really was clear when the issue came up, and the Watsons were leading a lot of effort. There were a lot of people here in City Hall, and when we had reflected back just how to address it, the fact that SB 10 came at a time that it did really helped that to expedite this process. There were a lot of concerns of what the spot zoning like? Are we going to be, is that going to be a concern of how we're handling it? And there are a lot of concerns about SB 10 as a standalone that I know I can say, but in this case, I'm glad we were able to address issues that residents brought forward. There are many people that came to speak on this issue, and we were able to do it in a way that aligned with what the state is requiring. And thank you, Planner Josh, you've been obviously given a lot of kudos today, but Mr. Wolf, you are commended for what you're able to do, and I am looking forward to adopting this and passing it. I know it's only the first reading, but again, it's always nice to be able to see when residents are concerned that we're able to find a resolution that makes sense for everyone.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
So I had to use my phone to enlarge the map, but I will say that I did notice, because Ms. Kennan gave her address to us, that it is within Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 4. So those are the proposed, that property is proposed to be rezoned back to its original state.
Any other, yes, Councilmember Creeves?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on what Councilmember Arizmendi said, because I think we did the right thing at the time that we approved the maps to be consistent, but it was a difficult decision because of the outcome. And so it's always great to know that you make the right decision, and then later you can go back and fix the equities. And I'm just so happy that we were able to do it, and certainly the speed at which we did it is, I don't want to say unprecedented, but certainly a pleasant surprise. And I'll just echo everyone else's kudos to the staff for making use of I mean, we constantly complain about the state law, so it's nice to see that we actually get use out of it in a way that benefits our community instead of not.
I'll try to be brief. I'll echo what other council members have said. As I said earlier tonight, I'm all for the consistency and cleanup and making sure that things are straightforward. I don't know that I'll always be able to say positive things about SB 10, but tonight I am. And I'm very thankful for staff for this being here, so I look forward to approving this.
I'd like to add my comments to, I agree with everything I've heard. You know, it's the political science professor in me has to say this, though. When we found these incongruities with this situation last fall, and we realized we were between a rock and a hard place, we had to make a decision. It was a tough decision. And we knew we were leaving people in the lurch, and they were having to trust us that we could kind of pull a rabbit out of the hat. And that trust you know, that is appreciated by us, because I think city government works when there's trust both ways. And this just happened to work out optimally, maybe even better than optimally, because of SB 10 and some other factors like an incredibly innovative associate planner in the planning department. But it's all good, and we're really, really happy for all you who are going to end up in the right position after all. Is there a motion for the first reading?
I'll move to approve the first reading of ordinance 1448.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously, happily. Now we move on to, yay! Now we move on to the next public hearing item. I've lost my agenda. Where am I? Oh, there we go. Consideration of ordinance 1451.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be presenting today. So this past legislative cycle, there were 4 bills that amended the density bonus law. We'll only be talking about 2 of them because only 2 of them are relevant to the city of Sierra Madre. And in this presentation, really there are 3 types of recommendations that are being made. One are recommendations made under state law to make sure our existing ordinance is consistent with state law. The second are staff's recommendations to refine our existing ordinance, and the third are planning commission recommendations to encourage the use of this density bonus ordinance. So the First Amendment, under prior law, the term common interest development was used, but under new law, SB 290, the term development in which units are for sale is used. The effect is to expand the types of for sale, moderate income and low income housing units that can benefit from the density bonus law. So it's just a more general term. Common interest development has a very specific meaning. And this proposed amendment is relevant to sections 2, 5, and 6 of the ordinance. The second proposed amendment is actually one proposed by staff. We realized that the calculation that we've been using, I scrolled ahead.
There you go.
The calculation was incorrect. So 35%, we were using a 35% number. It should be 30%. So to be consistent with state law, so we're just amending that calculation error, and that's the extent of that second amendment. Number 3, members of the community and the Planning Commission have expressed concern about the fact that relatively large projects subject to density bonuses, are really awarded ministerially. They're not subject to any kind of design review, or to any kind of design review. So the compromise there, in order to be consistent with state law, which prohibits discretionary hearings on density bonus awards, to be consistent with that law, staff's proposing the following: that we have an advisory design review for density bonus applications. This advisory design review is something that was also introduced in the religious housing overlay. Basically how that works is, when an application comes before the Planning Commission and members of the public, before it's approved, will have an opportunity to review that project, to see what's being built in their city, and to provide comments on it. Now the applicant can do what they want with their comments, but it provides members of the public an opportunity to engage with the applicant and to maybe change their mind if they think something doesn't fit right with the community. But it's purely persuasive. It's not a mandatory requirement. It's not, neither the Planning Commission nor members of the public will be able to impose anything on the applicant through this preliminary design review process. And it's intended to be preliminary in the sense that when an application is complete, but prior to actual finalized drawings, it'll come before the body so they can make comments, so that before the drawings are finalized, they can provide some input for the architect. The Fourth Amendment concerns incentives, concessions, and waivers. So as you may know, if someone is granted a density bonus, In addition to the density bonus, they get these things called concessions and incentives and potentially waivers. Under prior law, it was permitted to deny an incentive, concession, or waiver or reduction in development standards if there's a specific adverse impact on the physical environment. There are a number of reasons why you can deny this. One of them was an adverse impact on the physical environment. That's been struck from the state language. So a specific adverse impact on the physical environment is no longer a basis on which to deny an incentive, concession, or waiver. Parking. Under prior law, there was a reduced parking ratio of 0.5 for housing developments with at least 11% very low income or 20% lower income units and located within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop. So the way the density bonus statute works is you either have to meet a certain percentage of very low income units, a certain percentage of lower income units, or a certain percentage of moderate income units in order to qualify for a density bonus. Previously, the statute left out the moderate income units. Now the new law allows moderate income units to also qualify for this reduced parking ratio. And that's the difference here. Appeals. This is also a staff recommendation. The existing code and state law do not provide for an appeal process. Staff recommends that we provide an appeal procedure consistent with due process and other development provisions under the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. The idea here being that sometimes, whether it's staff or it's the Planning Commission, mistakes are made, and we'd like an opportunity to fix those mistakes administratively before there's a lawsuit is necessary. Amendment number 7, this one comes from the Planning Commission. The existing law and our ordinance prohibit the combination of a density bonus from different categories. So in other words, if you have a housing project consisting of 20 units, you have to choose whether you're going to rely, in order to gain the density bonus, whether you're going to make those a certain percentage lower income or moderate or very low income. What this will do is it proposes allowing the applicant to combine some of those affordable units from different income categories in order to qualify for a density bonus. It basically encourages more affordable development by allowing the applicant to combine from different income categories. So state law, although it does prohibit the combination under the default standards, it does allow cities to adopt ordinances that incentivize the construction of affordable units. So this is something that is within the city's discretion if it wants to allow its applicants to combine different categories. This is also a recommendation from the Planning Commission. The existing code draws a distinction between for rent units for very low and lower income. So necessarily, if you're going to have a density bonus application and you're going to rely on lower income or very low income households, those have to be for rent. They can't be for sale. Similarly, if you're going to have moderate income units in your development and qualify for the density bonus, those have to be for sale. They can't be for rent. So the Commission recommends removing this distinction between for rent and for sale. Regardless of whether it's for sale or for rent, if it meets that income category's thresholds, let it count toward a density bonus, is what the Planning Commission is recommending. And again, the effect of that is to incentivize developers to structure a project in order to qualify for a density bonus. It provides them more options. This last one is not a recommendation from the Planning Commission. They decided against it, as did staff, but I just bring it to your attention to make you aware of it. Currently, our affordability standard is that a unit subject to the affordability restrictions must be subject to that restriction for 55 years. And we record that on the deed and remains affordable for that extent of time. AB 634 authorizes the city to pass an ordinance establishing an affordability period longer than 55 years, potentially in perpetuity if the city wants. Now, staff discussed it and the planning commission discussed it, and the consensus was that this probably isn't a good idea because it disincentivizes fixing up a property over a period of time, because all these units have a life, and once they've lived out their useful life, there's a requirement that the owner insert more cash into to fix up the unit, to either renovate it or demolish it and build a new unit. And there's a real disincentive there if it's going to be affordable forever. And so that's why staff's recommending against it, as did the planning commission. And that concludes my report. Thank you, council.
Thank you, City Attorney Garagosian. Questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Rosemendi.
Attorney Garagosian, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I can assume that all of the recommendations that staff made and Planning Commission made, that there are no concerns, but I just want to make sure I can hear it from you. I see them as recommendations, but reassurance from the City Attorney that there's no reason to be concerned from the recommendations that were made by either body.
That's correct, Councilmember Arizmendi. I have no concern.
Others? Councilmember Parker?
I had 2 questions. So on Amendment 8, so there isn't a perverse incentive here that would create more renters than homeowners on it? Or I'm trying to think about, if we're going to be grouping renters and homeowners, we don't incentivize developers to create homes just for rent, but for ownership. Can you opine on kind of how that dynamic works in this amendment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I understand it, it's difficult to build market rate moderate homes. And so if you allow the applicant the opportunity to have moderate homes I'm sorry, I messed up earlier. As I understand, it's difficult to have moderate for sale homes. If you give the applicant the opportunity to have moderate for rent homes, they're more likely to build that. So this would incentivize likely moderate for rent housing. What you won't find, what you're unlikely to find, is grouping for sale units and for rent units. You're not likely to get that scenario. But you might find scenarios where you have a certain percentage of the property for lower income and a certain percentage of the property for moderate income combined, because it might make sense for them financially to allow for a greater density bonus. You might also find that.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, that this could cause there to be more moderate rental units than for sale units?
Yes.
And was that discussed at the Planning Commission meeting and the perverse impacts that has?
They didn't think it was perverse. They were aware of it, and they thought this would promote more housing in the city, and so they thought, and it would promote the use of the density bonus law, because as it stands, I think there's only been one density bonus application, so it's being underutilized.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next agenda item under Assembly Bill 803, that would incentivize moderate income for sale units, whereas we're not really doing it here, but with what we're hearing next, that would likely do that, correct?
That's correct. And one thing I'll note, the density bonus law only applies to housing projects that are at least 5 units or more, which is why you don't see that very often in the city of Sierra Madre.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was helpful. I have one other question. So I am no lawyer, so this may be a really naive question, but isn't there a legal concept of the rule against perpetuities? And so how then does AB 634 deal with the rule against perpetuities? Like, it's one of those things I have been told that is one of those terms that you learn in law school, and says you never need to worry about this, and yet it's come up more than once in my career.
Councilmember Garcia has something to say.
No, just funny thing is, I'm an co-author of a book that has to do with remainder perpetuities, and I think that's what you're talking about. So having something into perpetuity is okay, but a remainder perpetuity, meaning that you have a primary, it has to do with passing land and,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
so.
you can't lock land up
Yes.
for forever.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm trying to understand how that.
So I think we're talking about title here, rather than permitting somebody to carry land throughout multi-generations, right? We're talking about title
Okay.
instead of that.
Yeah, this,
It's more like an easement than it would be than a title ownership.
right, so this would be a restriction
Okay.
on title as opposed to,
There we go.
who owns the property. But thank you for that question. I hadn't thought about it since the bar exam.
There actually was a rule against perpetuities question on my bar exam.
Very unfortunate.
It was a red herring. I do have two questions though. Just on Amendment 5, and you might not know the answer to this, so we may have to direct it elsewhere. Talks about measuring from major transit stops. I'm not sure we have one anymore.
We do not have a major transit stop in the city of Sierra Madre, correct?
And then my other question on Amendment 6, in terms of appeals, I mean, my understanding generally is that most of this is non-discretionary, and so what are we envisioning would be, what decisions made that would then be subject to this appeal process?
If an applicant is denied a density bonus, they have the opportunity to appeal the director's denial to the planning commission.
So that's just based on those few factors that exist in the law in terms of like public safety concern or things, the things that are actually in the
findings.
Yeah.
Right.
Are we good? Okay, let's open this one up for public hearing, public comment on this agenda item. Any emails?
Mr. Mayor, staff did not receive any emails, and there are no speaker cards submitted on this item.
Okay, thank you, Madam City Clerk. So we'll bring this one back to the council.
Well, I'd like to commend staff, the Planning Commission, and Attorney Garagosian of pulling 4 different bills together in one set of updates. This was a tough one to follow in the staff report, but your presentation was very clear, and it's a very nice way of pulling together a lot of different requirements.
Any other thoughts?
I just
Yes.
have one, and I wasn't sure where to bring it up because I know this preliminary design review concept appears in all of these, but I think I'll bring it up here. Are we at all concerned that the way it's phrased will lead people who, developers, to not distinguish between what they would think design review was in terms of an actual review and approval versus, as you've described, this more, comment period and none of the comments being binding? I just worry that we could be viewed as, suggesting that there might be a design review process that is no longer permitted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be for staff to explain to the applicant upon application what the process is going forward, and to help them realize that the community is going to have an opportunity to view your project and provide input. And we are suggesting that they incorporate that input into whatever ultimate design they have that's going to be reviewed by the director. But we'd make it clear to them that they're not bound by those suggestions.
And having that opportunity for review or planning commission meeting, being agendized in a planning commission meeting, that in itself is not some barrier that we're going to face concerns over.
I don't think so. So I'll clarify in the next presentation, but essentially, a lot of the new laws have a requirement that says you can't have discretionary review. And a lot of them say you have to have ministerial review. But those are two separate things. So anytime they say you have to have ministerial review, but are silent as to discretionary review, for example, the density bonus, we try to allow some discretionary review. But in the case of like SB 9 or the ADU law, it says ministerial review and no discretionary review. In those cases, we don't have this preliminary design review proceeding in place.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion?
I'll move to adopt the first reading of Ordinance 1451.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table with a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And we move on to public hearing item number 4, consideration of adoption of ordinance 1452.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be presenting this one as well. And Mayor, I leave it to your discretion, but it may make more sense because this one is among the more complex things we're gonna look at this year. If you'd like to stop me during the presentation and ask questions, I leave it to your discretion, or if you'd like to wait for questions at the end.
I will allow that, sure. That makes good sense.
So today we're covering 2 very large bills that we've grouped.
Are you ready to do this?
that we've grouped because we think it makes the most sense to group them into one ordinance. The California Home Act, which actually stands for the California Housing Opportunity and More Efficiency Act, and Assembly Bill 803, the Starter Home Revitalization Act. I'll come back to that slide. So here's the overview. In going through these, we're going to have to break them up into, although SB 9 is one bill, it really does 2 separate things. So when we talk about SB 9, we should be aware there's the urban lot split aspect to it, and there's the ministerial design review permit aspect of it. And AB 803, what we're calling here small home lot developments, that's what the statute refers to. Think of that really as a bungalow court type situation. So whereas SB 9 is happening, in a single family residential zone, AB 803 is happening in a multifamily zone, and the development that's being contemplated by AB 803 is like a bungalow court. So let's start with urban lot splits all the way to the top. It adds a government code section to the Subdivision Map Act, and it ministerially approves splitting a single parcel into 2 in a single family residential zone. That's the essence of it. Single parcel, it can now be 2, and ministerially approved. It doesn't need to go through the Planning Commission anymore. And before it'd go to the City Council too, it doesn't need to go to the City Council anymore. The second aspect here, SB 9, Ministerial Design Review, that second highlighted portion. It adds a new section to the Government Code. And interestingly, it places it right between the ADU law and the JADU law to give you a sense of how the legislator is thinking about this ministerial process. It ministerially approves development of up to 2 new units in a single family residential zone. So no more design review if a person applies to build a new home using SB 9. They can build 1 or up to 2. They can build a duplex in a single family zone. AB 803, small home lot developments, again adds a new section to the Subdivision Map Act, and it ministerially approves splitting a single parcel and the development of single family units up to the maximum allowable density in a multifamily residential zone. It's complex. To break it down, you have 1 parcel in a multifamily zone. What this AB 803 contemplates is taking that 1 parcel, cutting it up, and having each individual parcel be for sale, and building 1 small house on each of those individual parcels, kind of like a bungalow court. No HOA though, they're all owned separately. Really, they're creating a single family zone and a multi-family zone is what's really happening.
Isn't it the other way around? Like creating a multi-family zone?
AB 803 only applies in a multi-family zone. So we have a multi-family zone, they're cutting it up into single family homes, so they're creating kind of a single family zone. Do you have a question, Councilman Garcia?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, are we gonna have to deal with, like right-of-way uses through properties, if, like,
Yes.
I'm trying to,
And I'll get to
okay,
that.
okay.
Yeah, I think I'll get to that. Last point here, what's the purpose of this statute? It's to facilitate the construction of the missing middle housing. This has become a big deal in California because statutes like the density bonus ordinance and all the funding that state's providing is really geared toward the lowest income individuals. And of course, the market provides for people who have the money to purchase market rate homes. But it's your teachers, you know, civil servants, people that have full-time positions but get paid minimum wage. These are the folks that aren't able to purchase homes in California, the missing middle. So let's talk about SB 9 first and where this applies. As mentioned before, it applies in single-family residential zones. This term is not defined. But what it means is essentially those zones where single-family homes are permitted. So places where you don't have duplexes and apartment buildings. So that's the R1, the RC, our residential canyon zone, and the hillside management zone. Those are the 3 zones in our city where we have a single-family residential zone. Doesn't apply to the commercial, institutional, multifamily, et cetera.
So we're thinking about this, if we're thinking about a historical home and demolition, do we have any, as a city, have any rights to protect those?
Yes, I will get to
Okay, sorry.
Eligible sites for AB 803. So SB 9 is about single-family zones. AB 803 is about multifamily zones. Our multifamily residential zones are the R2, the R3, and what you've recently approved today, the R320 and the R330. It doesn't, or you didn't approve that today. You approved that earlier, but we discussed that today. Doesn't apply to the commercial, institutional, or single-family residential zones. So under SB 9, there are certain development standards. Those include the following: floor area. So this is for urban lot splits. So this isn't about the duplexes. These are about splitting. This is about splitting a lot now. If we're going to split a lot, the development standards in place have to allow for at least an 800 square foot unit to be built. So if we split a parcel, the development standards involved in that split have to allow at least an 800 square foot unit to be built on each parcel. Density, you have to have at least, the development standards have to permit at least 2 units per parcel. Lot size, the resulting lots must be at least 1,200 square feet, which means the original lot must be split from a 2,400 square foot lot. As I understand it, after speaking to the director, there are very few lots of this size. Maybe you might find some in the canyon, but that's it. The required minimum lot size in Sierra Madre, as you may know, is 7,500 square feet. So you won't really find a lot of examples of a 2,400 square foot lot in Sierra Madre. No new parcel may be smaller than 40% of the lot of the original parcel. So if you're going to split it, it can be a 60-40 split, it can be a 55-55 split, but you couldn't, I'm sorry. I already confused myself. It could be a 45-55 split, but it couldn't be a 70-30 split, for example. Sticking with urban lot splits. Height, it's silent as to height. Setbacks, no setbacks for existing structures in the same location with the same dimensions. If you have a structure already built on the site, you can't impose new setbacks on it. No setbacks up to 4 feet from the side and rear lot lines. So if you're going to build a new structure, the new minimum setback is 4 foot side and rear lot lines, and both of those provisions are consistent with the ADU law. It's the same standards. Parking, the city can require off-street parking of up to 1 space per unit unless it's located within 1/2 mile of a high quality transit corridor, or within 1 block of a car share location, which we don't have in Sierra Madre, so we'll be requiring 1 parking space per unit.
Before you go on,
Yes.
if I go back one slide, so the lot needs to be a minimum of 2,400 square feet. Is there a time limit? I can just see eventually you've got lot split. Now, how long does time have to pass to do another lot split? Can you do another one?
No, you can only take advantage of SB 9 once,
Once ever?
ever.
On a given.
Currently.
Currently.
Yeah, exactly.
And when there is, if staff is required to process an urban lot split, staff will make a notation in the map that's going to be recorded with the county clerk's office, so that we're aware that this lot split was subject to SB 9, so that we won't be splitting it twice under SB 9.
Will we have any designation on, like not our land use, but maybe our zoning map that shows that, so if somebody comes to our counter, we'll know that this lot had already been split?
Well, we would know because the map that's recorded by the county, we have access to, so we view their map and we'd see, oh, it has a notation that says urban lot split.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So the second part of SB 9, right? The first part's the urban lot split. The second is this ministerial design review, the duplex provision. So with respect to height, I'm sorry, floor area, right? With respect to floor area, it's the same requirement, need to build, the development standards need to allow for at least an 800 square foot unit. Density, the development standards need to allow for at least 2 units per parcel. Lot size, the ministerial design review provisions of SB 9 are silent as to lot size, but as we know from the urban lot split, it needs to be at least 1,200 square feet. Height, it's silent as to height. The setback requirements are the same. The parking requirements are the same. Now switching over to AB 803, this bungalow court concept.
I'm gonna have a question about the map that you showed, and specific to the SB 9. Should I wait until the end, or should we do that before we move to 803?
Did you see the map I showed?
Yeah, you showed the sort of not map, or the rendering.
Oh, yes, we can address that. This was taken from the city of Huntington Beach, I believe, Laguna Beach.
I understand, the lots in the middle, for example, that go from, they're green with brown houses. They go from, having sort of one structure to having 2. What I don't understand is what it is about SB 9 that creates the situations that are kind of on the ends, the blue house at the bottom and the dark brown at the top. That those appear to be single units, or are these just multi-units in one, because I'm not hearing anything in SB 9 that just allows you to create a larger single unit, without review on your property.
Yeah, perhaps I shouldn't have used this illustration only because the city of Laguna Beach used it as a way to deride SB 9. So there's a bit of hyperbole here, and you see there's like a ton of cars on the street, and there's no more trees.
Right.
Yeah,
no, I wasn't commenting on the
so
design of
this
it,
is-
but I didn't know if it was meaning to depict that you would be able to take advantage of SB 9 to merely upgrade the size of your existing.
I think that's what they were trying to communicate. I don't know that that's per se correct, but that's what they were trying to communicate.
So as long as we're on this one, and if we look at the one with the 2 brown buildings on the after SB 9 on the left-hand side, Mayor Pro Tem Garcia asked about right-of-way. Can you talk to us about how right-of-way would work? Some of on that one, you'd have to have some right-of-way for the back unit to the front unit.
I will, if I can get to that at the end. I think I cover it later on in the presentation.
Okay.
And if I don't, please raise it again, and I will.
Since we're still on SB 9, can you talk a little bit about duplexes? So maybe those are supposed to be larger buildings that are duplexes sharing a wall, or?
Could be.
Oh, okay.
Could be. Yeah, it could be.
And that's under the law, you can build a larger structure that's a duplex.
Under the law, you can build, your development standards in the city have to allow units that are at least 800 square feet. So what you could do is you could stack 800 square foot units on top of each other and call that a duplex. you could do that. And our code has specific standards as to, I believe the standards in our code reference the underlying zone. So if you want to build in the R1, then whatever the lot coverage standard is, that's what's going to govern. And assuming you can build however big your home's going to be within that lot coverage, you're allowed. And if the lot coverage in the underlying zone prohibits you from building 800 square feet, then we're going to have to waive a certain extent of our underlying zone development standard to allow for that development. And same thing with height and all the other
This
stuff.
is very informative, thank you. And do you have to do a lot split in order to do the duplex? Those are two separate things, right?
Those are two separate things.
And if you do a duplex, if you perform a duplex, does that prohibit that land from now being split? If you know.
I do know. There's an image coming up. I
Okay.
promise it's in here.
Okay.
It'll make much for a sense. Well, I guess I took the image out, but
Practically, right? If you put money into putting in a duplex, you're not probably gonna then tear it down to split the lot. So probably from a practical aspect, there's probably a market.
One side of the lot, and you split it later.
You have to have a pretty big lot.
so looking at AB 803, the development standards. I think we were on the next. No, we were on the slide. Floor area. So AB 803 requires. It's a term of art here. An average total floor area of floor space not to exceed 1,700 net habitable square feet. So, the average floor area, that means you take all the floor areas of different units, the average floor area has to be 1,750 net habitable square feet. So, not a garage. You can't count garages, you can't count patios, it has to be habitable square feet. And that's what that's getting at. Density. The development will result in at least as many units as the maximum allowable residential density. So if your underlying residential density is R330, you have to build at least 30 units. That's why it probably won't be as common in Sierra Madre. But it might be more common in other cities. Or if it's R320, you have to build at least 20 units. Residential properties within a radius of 500 feet of the site are zoned for less than 30 dwelling units per acre. What they're trying to prevent here are huge apartment complexes next to a bungalow court, because it doesn't look right. So if you have a small apartment building or a bungalow court, you can build a bungalow court next to it, is the idea. Lot size. Minimum lot size requirements are prohibited, and a maximum lot size is 5 acres. And
you could make, so how can you have a minimum lot size prohibited? So could you make a?
Because of floor area.
Right, because you have to, the parcel, the individual parcel has to allow for homes that have an average 1,750 square feet. So you'd have to have at least something like, I would assume, over 2,000 square foot parcel to accommodate something like that.
The floor area.
The floor area creates the minimum.
Creates the minimum.
Yeah.
Especially if it's times
The,
30.
really all the standards are related to each other. Yeah. I promised it was complex.
Yeah.
AB 803 also prohibits the city from imposing a homeowners association. The idea there being that homeowner association fees can oftentimes be pretty expensive, and the state's trying to keep the cost down for these potential homeowners. Height, existing height limits apply. Setbacks, external, existing front, side, and rear setback requirements. No setback requirements between units though, so you can imagine they can be pretty close together. They could also be touching potentially. Parking, no standard for the number of parking spots, no standard for whether parking must be on-site or off-site, but it prohibits requirements that parking be enclosed or covered.
When you say no standard, it means it just is silent.
It's
not
silent as to those standards, yeah. back to lot splits, SB 9. So urban lot splits are permitted by right and processed ministerially under SB 9. Currently, a parcel map, in order to split a lot, you need a parcel map. And that parcel map needs planning commission and city council approval. That's the current process. So that process is gonna be done away with if you're gonna go the urban lot split route. You're still gonna need a parcel map if you wanna divide a lot into 3 separate parcels, or if you're gonna divide a lot into 4 separate parcels. If you're gonna divide a lot into more than 4 parcels, you need a tentative tract map. So this really only applies when you're gonna split a lot into 2. The lot to be split cannot be created through an urban lot split, right? So that means you only get one shot at this. And it cannot be adjacent to another parcel that was subject to an urban lot split. And the logic here is this. The legislator wants to prevent private equity developers from coming in and purchasing a bunch of homes all next to each other and splitting up those lots and turning a big profit on the development that they have for the entire block, let's say. I guess this has been an issue in California, and the legislator is trying to address it. So this is really intended to benefit homeowners and not private development.
I think we discussed this either at our meeting or maybe the planning commission, and I forget what the answer was, but this doesn't create a race to split, right? Because there's, like as between me and my neighbor, if I do it first, then they can't do it. I think it has to be the same ownership, correct?
Correct. It's either the same owner or an agent of the owner. Those two are prohibited.
Oh.
So you and your neighbor can both do it, but if
I bought my neighbor's house, I couldn't do it in both lots.
Exactly. And if, like, let's say you rented to your neighbor, but you own that lot, your neighbor couldn't then do it because you're the true owner.
So I see in your slides, you're going to talk about the 3-year tenant rule, but it's my understanding there's also a 3-year owner-occupier rule as well.
Yes.
Are you gonna speak on that, or?
I will.
Okay.
I will.
'Cause I didn't see that in the slides, okay.
I will, yeah, I believe I am. The applicant will be required to sign an affidavit. I'll get to it right now, actually. The applicant will be required to sign an affidavit saying that he will, 1, occupy one of the lots for at least 3 years. So if you're going to use this provision, you need to live in at least one of them. Again, this is intended to prevent private equity firms from coming in, dividing them up, selling them, and leaving. You can't use the property for short-term rentals because short-term rentals don't address the housing crisis. And lastly, they'll be used for residential use. You can't use it for some commercial purpose, creating a business out of your home and, converting into a dentist's office, for example.
Even in our entrepreneurial overlays?
That's different.
Okay.
That's different. Those are residential. Well, I guess the primary use has to be residential.
Gotcha.
You can run a business out of it, but the primary use has to be residential.
Okay.
And just a quick question on that. So when we have the case where we have homes that are being used for 6 beds or less, for example, a rehabilitation house, are they exempt from, or can they use
Yes.
these homes?
Yes,
For
because
that.
that's considered a residential use. Correct. Slide. SB 9, Ministerial Design Review. So not urban lot splits anymore. We're talking about Ministerial Design Review. Single-family homes and duplexes are now permitted by right and processed ministerially. Under our existing code, currently permits duplexes conditionally in an R1 zone, so you need a conditional use permit to build one of those. Under SB 9, you get a maximum of 4 dwelling units from the original parcel. So this is how this would work. If you decide to take advantage of the urban lot split provision and split the lot, and take advantage of this ministerial design review permit process and build duplexes, you get 4.
4 duplexes?
No, you get 4 units total. Yeah. Under our existing code, you currently get 3 because you can have your single family home plus a JADU plus an ADU. So you're currently allowed 3. So this law allows you 4. The difference between this law and the J8 and the ADU law is that these can be sold separately, versus the ADU law that prevents you from selling them separately. The ADUs must go with the home. So they can be rented out, but they can't be sold separately. These are intended to be, the Ministerial Design Review Permit and the Urban Lot Split under SB 9 are intended to be separable.
Maybe you're gonna get to it, but if I remember correctly, SB 9 does not allow, it allows this maximum of 4, but then you can or cannot put an ADU on there as well.
My next point is a perfect transition. You cannot. You're limited to 4 units total. So what you can do is, you can have an urban lot split, build single units, and build 2 little ADUs in the back. You could choose to do that, and that gives you 4 units. You can split the lot, build duplexes and have 4 units. You can do that. You can even choose to not split the lot. Build a duplex using Ministerial Design Review, and then have a JADU and an ADU in the back and have 4 units. But you're limited to 4 units.
Well, if you had the main house, that would give you 5, right?
If you had, under the Ministerial Design Review Permit, I'm assuming that you demolish the existing house,
Okay.
you build a duplex, and you have an ADU and a JADU. And you would have 4.
So you couldn't demolish a house, split the lot, build a house on each,
Mm-hmm.
and then build an ADU and a JADU on each.
No, because that would give you 6.
Right.
So you'd be prohibited, correct,
Okay.
correct. And our ordinance says so expressly, as does the state law. AB 803 allows subdivisions and multifamily developments permitted by right and processed ministerially. Currently, such developments must obtain design review permits, but would be subject to the limitations under the Housing Accountability Act and the Housing Crisis Act. The limitations on this type of housing, as I've mentioned earlier, they have to be for sale. The individual parcels have to be owned in fee simple, and they must be for single-family residential use. Exceptions to SB 9. So there's an exception for sensitive sites, and there's a whole list of them. One such sensitive site are very high fire hazard severity zones, but that doesn't prohibit, and as you probably know, half of Sierra Madre is within a very high fire hazard severity zone, but that exception doesn't apply because there's a carve out for those sites subject to this zone that have mitigation measures that have been adopted, and we've adopted mitigation measures in our building code, such as construction with fire resistant material, etc. You may have heard of the city of Woodside tried to use this sensitive site to, because I guess they said that their entire city is a mountain lion sanctuary. And the AG has already weighed in on that and saying that that's not a permissible use of this pretty narrow limitation. Another limitation is that SB 9 won't apply to historic properties or districts, or we could choose to have them not apply to historic properties or districts. Sierra Madre has a few historic properties, but it has no historic districts. Also, as you may have heard, the city of Pasadena tried to use this in their landmark district. And again, the AG weighed in and said that's an inappropriate use of this exception. So again, it's intended to be narrow.
Their landmark district, I read that article, I wasn't clear on what they were talking about. I mean, would for example, Bungalow Heaven be a historic district, or these are only districts that have actually been designated in a very specific way?
So here's an interesting difference between the ADU law and SB 9. The ADU law has the same kind of carve out, but the ADU law says only those properties designated historic by the state can be exempted from the ADU law. But SB 9 says those properties that are designated historic by the state or local government can be exempt. Now, with respect to the bungalow court, yeah, that would be exempt. I think the exemption that the city of Pasadena got struck on was there's the one that was struck down wasn't the bungalow court. It was another landmark district in the city that, for whatever reason, I haven't evaluated the merits of it, but it didn't meet their requirements here. The state also took issue with the fact that they adopted it via urgency ordinance. According to the state, they didn't make the proper findings.
Well, they also tried to make the whole city a historic district, so that might have raised some eyebrows.
Right, that too.
So when you say you can't do it on a historic property, what does that mean? You can't demolish a historic home and do a lot split?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Under AB 803, it's prohibited on sites identified in the housing element as a site to accommodate any portion of the city's RENA for lower income households. These units aren't intended to be lower income. They're intended to be lower, they're intended to be affordable, but built at the market rate. They're not deed restricted affordable. And the state doesn't want developers competing for these sites when the city has already determined that this is set aside for deed restricted affordable units. So they're trying to preserve every city's deed restricted affordable unit potential supply. It's silent as to an exception for historic properties or districts and as to sensitive areas. And it prohibits the imposition of homeowners associations, as stated earlier.
But would one of these developments, I guess I saw somewhere where it sort of talks about affordability by design versus affordability by, by statute.
Right.
By virtue of their size, I assume that's why they would be more moderately priced, because they just aren't big enough to warrant the large prices. Do those then, depending on their market price, would those be able to be counted in depending on where they fall in the income range? Would the city be able to count those as against our RENA numbers if there was one of these projects developed?
That's an interesting question, because we had that same question about ADUs. ADUs are also affordable by design, and we were concerned that they wouldn't be counted because our ADUs aren't currently deed restricted. But SCAG came in and made a deal with HCD to say all our ADUs will count as moderate or lower income units, and so those were counted. So I'll be curious to know whether our Southern California Association of Governments can have the same agreement with the Department of Housing and Community Development to count these as affordable, because like you said, they're affordable by design. They're just built smaller.
Do we know if there's been any efforts behind that?
I have no idea.
Who's our SCAG representative?
That's why I'm writing notes.
Next slide. Anti-displacement. We are seeing these in all the new housing bills coming down from the state. The state's other concern is while they want to encourage development, they don't want existing homeowners to be put out so that developers can build new units. So each one of these, you found it in SB 330, I believe it's in the Housing Accountability Act, and you're seeing it now in SB 9 and AB 803, these anti-displacement provisions. So for urban lot splits, the urban lot split would not, it's as a condition, the urban lot split would not require that the demolition or alteration of a housing unit that's subject to a recorded covenant, ordinance, or law that restricts rents to affordable housing levels, subject to rent or price control, occupied by a tenant for at least 3 years, or removed from the rental market under the Ellis Act, which basically allows a landlord to take it off the market and occupy it or have his children occupy it. So the intention here is if you already have affordable units at the site or it's being rented, they don't want you tearing it down and building new and splitting the lot.
Are these ands or ors?
Ands. Or sorry, it's it's one, any one of these.
So it's not necessarily has to be affordable, right? Because you could have a non-affordable unit occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so this is pretty broad.
It's broad.
So they know. So people, if someone owns a complex in town now that is actively renting, they couldn't take advantage of any of this to do any of these developments.
They can't. It's really for property owners who are living in their units who want to take advantage of this. The next slide has, again, very similar limitations on displacement of existing renters. The only difference is this section highlighted in red. It says the ministerial design review does not demolish more than 25% of the existing exterior structural walls unless allowed by the city. So the state's saying you have a unit, add to it, don't demolish it, is what they're saying. So you can build a duplex, you can tear down the side and add an ADU. They don't want you tearing down the unit. And I believe there's, unless it's allowed by the city, is the exception.
So you have to keep at least one wall. If we want to, we would require to keep at least one wall. You just demolish everything but that, you split the lot, and then you build 4 units.
Well, you couldn't build 4 units on a single lot. So you would split the lot,
Right.
and on one of the lots you'd demolish 25% maybe, and you'd build another unit in the back. That's possible. And then on the separate lot you can build 2 new units.
So you have to keep at least 25% of the building.
You have to keep at least 25%, correct. So if you think about it, if a home has a pretty big backyard, you can split the home and have that entire backyard area developed as a separate unit. Small home lot developments, AB 803. Again, very similar requirements. Oddly, I don't know why, the tenant occupancy requirement is changed from 3 years to 7 years. I can't explain why the legislator made that decision. So findings for every good permit should have findings. So for SB 9, in order to take advantage of the urban lot split or ministerial design review, the development needs to comply with the Sierra Madre Municipal Code and the relevant chapters. The development needs to be consistent with all objective, local general plan, zoning, subdivision, design standards. A lot of those standards have been outlined in the ordinance. And the building official has not concluded that the development has a specific adverse impact on public health or safety that cannot be mitigated or avoided without rendering the development financially infeasible. And here's an example.
Sorry, we're not finished.
And here's an example. If you have an urban, let's assume for a second that you have an urban lot split. And because you've split the lot and you want to build a unit in the back, for whatever reason, we can't get the sewer connection to that unit in the back. So in that case, we would prohibit the development, and we wouldn't allow the SB 9 application to go through, because we'd make written findings that the absence of a sewer connection is necessary to preserve public health and safety. So the building official would deny the application on those grounds, for example.
But just to play that out a little bit more, but we couldn't require a specific type of hookup, right? We couldn't have a situation where we require all of these units to have a direct line to the sewer to basically limit even further the ability to do this, right? Like if
you're saying if they had the septic option?
Yeah, or you know, basically create a situation where we require something that's going to make many of these projects fail the finding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're requiring to take the sewer example, we're requiring you have to be able to have a connection to, a main line versus, an offshoot, so making a situation where we've made the requirement more onerous in order to have a situation where this finding could be met.
These often aren't city standards. These are building code standards adopted by the state, and we adopt those standards by reference. So any limitations wouldn't be our limitations, they'd be the state's adopted building code limitations.
Okay, good.
Next slide. So findings for AB 803, small home lot developments, I should say, not displacement. The development meets the requirements of AB 803 under the government code. The development complies with all requirements of the Subdivision Map Act and are not in conflict with AB 803. Development complies with all local general plan, zoning, subdivision, design standards that do not conflict with AB 803. And again, the building official has not concluded that the development has a specific adverse impact on the public health or safety and cannot be mitigated or avoided without rendering the development financially infeasible. So here's, I apologize, the text is pretty small, but I'd like to provide a general overview of what things look like today in Sierra Madre when it comes to development and planning approvals. When an application comes in, there's a pre-filing conference that takes place. Sometimes that's called a pre-development review, depending on the type of application submitted. So that's the applicant meeting with staff. The next step is staff gets the application and does its own planning and zoning review. And the staff has to then determine whether or not this is going to be subject to discretionary review or ministerial review. If it's subject to discretionary review, and by no means is this intended to be an exhaustive list, this is only to illustrate the points discussed in the presentations today. If it's subject to discretionary review, then you might get a design review permit, which is reviewed by the director of planning. They might try to seek an administrative design review permit, which is reviewed by the planning director again, or they might try to get a parcel or tentative tract map, which can be reviewed by the planning commission and city council. Right, because the planning and tentative tract map are the alternatives to the urban lot split. If planning determines that it's not subject to discretionary review and it's subject to ministerial review, then those subject to ministerial review are the ministerial design review permit, so that's the SB9 duplexes, and that goes straight to the planning director. The urban lot splits, those go straight to the planning director. Or small home lot developments, the AB 803 provisions, that goes straight to the director. So what are the types of ministerial approvals today, given all the different state laws that have come down? So as I stated earlier, state law makes a distinction between ministerial approvals and those ministerial approvals that aren't subject to discretionary review. So in that first column there, it says ministerial review without public hearing. The state has come down and said you can't have discretionary review in these circumstances. Urban lot splits, no discretionary review. Ministerial design review permits, the duplexes, no design review. JADUs and ADUs. But where the state is silent as to discretionary public hearings, we required it. And we've required it through the preliminary design review process, as mentioned earlier. And now that process applies to density bonuses, small home lot developments to the extent we get any, the religious housing overlay that you heard about today, and the high density residential zone permits, which you've already looked at in the past. That's the R2, or the R320, R330 developments.
Can you remind me again, the ministerial design review permit, what are the criteria for that?
The findings that need to be made for that? Because that's the duplex one, and the findings that need to be.
Okay.
Would you like me to go through the findings?
Yeah, go ahead, finish up.
The findings that need to be made are that development complies with the relevant code section of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code, that the development is consistent with all objective local general plan zoning subdivision design standards, and the building official doesn't make that finding that it somehow impacts public health and safety. Those are the only findings that need to be made.
And I thought with the density bonus, it wasn't a public hearing that we were requiring a public hearing. We were recommending that it would be an input and feedback. Is that not correct?
That is correct. The term public hearing is actually, it might be a confusing term because it doesn't have a legal definition per se. It's really going to be a meeting, it's going to be a planning commission meeting, is what we can call it. Generally, the term public hearing is used, and maybe this is the wrong term to use, so I apologize for that, council member. Usually when we think of public hearings, we think of a meeting where statutory notice is required and public participation, and you have to allow public participation. As you know, every city council meeting or planning commission meeting has public comment. Okay. So it's kind of like a public hearing. The difference between a public hearing in the traditional sense is that there's a notice period required. That's greater than the Brown Act notice period. Brown Act is 3 days. Usually these planning development applications have a 10-day notice requirement. That's why they call them public hearings. But I've called it public hearing here just to, I tried to make it easier, but maybe I've confused everyone. So this is our world now with respect to ministerial review. And I believe this is the last slide. Limitations on design review. No more design review for the construction of new single-family units, duplex units, accessory dwelling units, lot line adjustments and mergers, which was already the case, lot splits, and multifamily residential developments under the Housing Accountability Act. We do have design review for residential replacements, so you're gonna demolish something and build something new, additions and improvements, and of course all commercial developments in the city. And that concludes my presentation.
So I thought there were more limits to design review. I thought there were a lot less things that could go to design review. So this seems to imply to me that most developments would go to design review. Oh, but the design review may not go to planning commission, is that right?
Correct, yeah, that's exactly right. The design review is currently being processed by the planning director.
So it would be a ministerial design review.
Correct. Correct, that's correct.
But it's a different ministerial design review than on the previous slide.
Yeah, we're using different terms. We're using design review, administrative design review, and when it comes to these duplexes under SB 9, ministerial design review permits.
That's why I got confused. Okay, thank
Do
you.
you have any other questions?
So thinking about an AB 803, let's say it's an R1 and it's not a wide lot, but it's a deep lot. Let's say the only way it works is maybe 3 homes along one side and there has to be a driveway. Do we have any, can we say, no, you can't do that because you're gonna have easements or issues with that?
Okay, thank you for asking that again. I didn't address it directly. I'm hoping a member of the planning staff can help me address that because that's a little more technical, I think, than I'm prepared to address. If maybe you could pose that question to the planning staff once more and they can answer that question.
I can ask you to repeat the question.
Sure, Director Gonzalez. So I'm thinking of an R1 zone with a deep lot rather than a wide lot, where it makes most sense to maybe have 3 homes stacked deep instead of wide. And maybe we don't want that, let's say, right? I think there would necessarily have to be easements throughout the property to access. Can we say that's not okay, or do we have to allow for easements and those types of issues?
Currently, under the zoning code, that scenario, not necessarily, well, it could even be 3 single-family homes with an access easement, a driveway easement that has access to each of the individual properties from that driveway. So you could have that, we do allow that even now.
So I'm thinking under AB 803, because one thing is there's no HOAs, so, you know, I mean, what's gonna happen, how do they maintain that driveway, and how does that even work?
Yeah, that would still be under the responsibility of property owners to maintain that.
Okay.
The private contract.
Okay.
Any other
Thank you.
questions? Thank you, City Attorney Garagosian, for that exhaustive, detailed report.
Very informative.
And I'd like to open this up for public comment, or public hearing for public comment. I think all interested parties have left the house. So we'll bring it back to the council. Do we need any further discussion?
I'm just going to echo what has already been said. I mean, this was extremely informative, extremely educational, and thank you for, I did give him a hard time when I heard there's 24 slides in the slide deck, but I think it was important to have all of these pieces, and I think as much as I may have thought I understood SB 9 This really did a detailed job in expanding it further, so thank you.
I'll echo that. I read the staff report and I'm like, oh my God. And so
I'm sorry.
No. So I'm thankful for the presentation because now I understand I understand the key points of both SB 9 and AB 803.
Any other comments?
And also to combine the two, too. I think you made a comment about that earlier. I think that was a creative way to address the ordinances, so thank you.
So can we entertain a motion?
I move to approve the first reading of ordinance 1452.
Is there a
Second.
second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Which brings us to the end of our agenda. Are there any ideas for future agenda items?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Councilmember Graves.
I would love, just based on news reports today, actually, but they've been coming out over the last few weeks, to hear from our IT department about our security measures related to cyber attacks, given today's warning, actually. So, among others. I know we've talked about it, behind the scenes, but I think it'd be good to give a presentation to the public so they understand what we've done and what we're doing.
Councilmember Creeves, I'm sure that our IT manager would be happy to give that report.
Any other ideas?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
We used to get a list of the upcoming meetings. It was in Excel. I'm wondering if we could get that and get on the schedule all 5 of the commissions. So at staff's discretion of when it makes sense to, but get them on the calendar so we know that they're coming. We had the community services last meeting, but it'd be nice to have all the others put on the calendar.
Just so I understand this correctly, you want a list of the times that that our commissions meet?
No, I'm sorry, let me clarify. I'd like to get all of the commissions scheduled for future presentations to future city council meetings. And however you'd like to do that, I suggested the Excel sheet. I shouldn't micromanage how to do that.
Got it.
And I was just gonna add, I think there was an intent to do it, but to know when they're on, I think would be helpful.
Other ideas? Okay, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned, folks. Good evening, everyone.